You know, in the world of logic, there's been this long-standing rivalry between two major ways of thinking. But what if they didn't have to be rivals? What if you could build one single system where both could not just exist but actually work together? Well, that's the whole idea behind something called ecumenical logic, and we're about to dive into how it all works.
So yeah, this is the big question, right? For decades, you had these two camps in logic, and they operated on totally different principles. But what if, instead of having to pick a side, you could just build a single house, a single structure where both of them could live?
All right, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the two logics at the heart of the story. Then, we'll explore the big idea to bring them together. After that, we'll use a really simple analogy to see how it works, check if the system is actually sound, and finally, take a peek at where this whole idea is heading today.
Okay, so before we can build any bridges, we really need to understand the two different islands we're trying to connect. At its core, this is all about two completely different philosophies on what even counts as a valid proof.
So on one side, you have what's called classical logic. It's super flexible. It allows for these clever indirect proofs, like the famous proof by contradiction. You might have heard it called reductio ad absurdum. Then on the other side, you've got intuitionistic logic, and it is much stricter. It demands what's called a constructive proof. Basically, you can't just prove something exists. You have to provide a direct method, a literal blueprint for finding it. No shortcuts.
For a really long time, everyone just saw these two as opposing teams. You were either on Team Classical or Team Intuitionist. But then this pretty revolutionary idea started to bubble up. Why do we have to choose? Why not create a single, bigger system where both of these philosophies can operate together?
And that idea is called logical ecumenism. The goal here isn't to prove that one logic is better than the other, not at all. It's about building a neutral playground where they can both interact. It's all about figuring out how their different rules can function side by side without clashing.
Now, this isn't some brand new idea. It was actually first dreamed up way back in the 1960s by a logician named D. Prawitz. And since then, researchers have been refining it, testing it, and now they're expanding it into some really exciting new areas, even into computer science.
So how in the world does this actually work? To really get a handle on it, let's borrow a great analogy from the source material, building a house. Let's think of the super strict, constructive, intuitionistic logic as a classic timber frame house. You know the kind. Every single beam, every joint, has a very specific visible purpose. You can see exactly how it's built, piece by piece. There are no abstract tricks here. It's all hands-on, straightforward construction. Now think of the more flexible, classical logic. This is like a modern steel frame house. Steel lets you do all sorts of abstract things. Create these huge open spaces, dramatic cantilevers, and support systems that aren't as direct or obvious as a timber frame, but are incredibly strong and versatile. And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of the idea. An ecumenical system isn't about tearing one house down to build another one. No way. It's about creating a single, unified architectural blueprint where timber frames and steel beams can work together to support the very same structure.
So you see, that house analogy leads us right to the formal definition. An ecumenical system is basically a proof system that lets you use the tools from both classical and intuitionistic logic, allowing them to hang out and interact inside one single, coherent framework.
Of course, if you're going to build a house with two totally different kinds of materials, you better be absolutely sure it's structurally sound, right? Well, that's exactly what logicians did with this system. They ran all the engineering checks on the blueprint.
To do this, they used a very specialized tool called sequent calculus. We don't need to get into the weeds on what that is. Just think of it like the super advanced software an architect uses to stress test their designs. It's a really powerful way to rigorously check if a logical system is solid.
And the results of these tests? A huge success. They established three key properties. First, normalization, which just means proofs can be boiled down to their simplest form. Then, soundness, which is absolutely critical. It means the system will never ever prove something that's false. And finally, completeness, meaning it can prove all the true statements it's designed to handle. In other words, the house is totally built to code.
So where does all this leave us today? Well, this whole idea of unification hasn't just been sitting on a shelf. It's actually opened up a whole new universe of possibilities, and it's a really active field of research right now.
People are now taking this ecumenical framework and extending it to modal logic. That's the logic of possibility and necessity.
They're also using it to get a better handle on the very meaning of logical terms by studying both proof styles together. And maybe the most exciting part, they're linking it all to computation, with the big goal of one day automating reasoning inside this powerful unified system.
This quote just nails it. It really captures the big shift in perspective here. The point is to study these two great traditions not as rivals, but as different facets, different sides of one much larger and more unified logical structure. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This idea of building a common ground for opposing philosophies is just incredibly powerful. So the question is, what other rival ideas in science, in art, maybe even in society, could benefit from being brought together not to compete, but to coexist within a single, unified framework?